How's it going, everybody? So in this video, I wanted to debunk some of Vegan Gains' claims about cholesterol and heart disease. I've made many videos about this before. I believe I even made a playlist with all of them, so you can check that out on my channel. Um, but he's constantly claiming that LDL plays a causal role in heart disease risk, and that's just not true. I'll show you guys the evidence here in this video and why it's completely retarded, especially based on the evidence he gets. It's extremely weak, and it's funny that it's funny how many people don't even actually observe the studies that he references. So I'm going to point it out here. So please watch the entire video. I promise you that this will be pretty enlightening on the lies that he likes to tell. So first of all, this video that we're going to be viewing is Layne Norton, Worst of the Fitness Industry. I don't like Layne Norton at all. I've debunked plenty of his claims before. I think that he has just as much bias as everyone else has in nutrition. He happens to be one of the calories in versus calories out. If it fits your macros, then it's healthy zealots on the internet. And he's just as biased as everyone else. Only this is worse because he promotes the eating of junk food as like neutral to your health, when it's actually one of the primary reasons why so many people overeat and have trouble sticking to diets in the first place. And I do believe that the junk food that this man promotes, Layne Norton, is one of the primary reasons why America went from being relatively healthy to being one of the most unhealthy nations in the country. And now every single country that used to be healthy, such as Japan and Okinawa, for example, are now suffering from the same westernized diseases as everyone else. It's because they're eating all the same junk food that this man promotes. Oh, sugar's okay, Pop-Tarts are okay, no difference between an apple and a Pop-Tart. As long as it fits your macros, it's okay. So I'm completely with Vegan Gains on his critique of Layne Norton in this regard. But my main gripe here is what Vegan Gains says about LDL. So let's begin.
So your LDL was 140. Now, some doctors may look at that and go, hey, that's a little bit elevated.
So Layne's cholesterol is through the roof. The number that stood out the most here was his LDL. He had an LDL cholesterol score of 140 milligrams per deciliter. Now, for reference, the healthy, normal physiological range for LDL cholesterol is 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. People who have an LDL cholesterol score in this range, they have an incredibly low risk of developing atherosclerosis. It is virtually zero. And
okay, so first of all, this graph right here, if people actually looked at this graph and understood what it meant, they would immediately stop believing everything Vegan Gains says. So first of all, virtually zero risk of developing heart disease with LDL below 70. Absolutely wrong. So first of all, here is a great case report, and I've seen many of these, but this is a vegan. They were vegan for 10 years leading up to this, and before that, they were vegetarian for 15 years. This is a woman. I believe she was 39 years old when this happened. Go ahead and read this for yourself. A vegan can have a heart attack. Yep, by Vegan RV. I made a video about this before, describing it in detail. But essentially, this woman was in her late 30s, which is very young to have a heart attack. And her LDL score, I believe at the time of this, was below 70. It was actually 69. And you know, she's been eating a vegan diet for 10 years leading up to this and was eating vegetarian for 15 before that. LDL was under 70. And if you look through her blog, she actually posts her LDL score. She had LDL 69 and an HDL level of like 20. See if I could find that. An LDL level of like 20. And her triglycerides were like 190. So her triglycerides were 190. Her HDL was like 20, and her LDL was 69. Okay, and in that blog, she talks about how she believed she believed, I think it's this one right here. She believed that as long as she kept her LDL below 70, that she would be heart attack free. And so she was following Dr. Esselstyn's advice from his book, and I believe it's this post, she discusses it. And she was irritated because right here, this is it. If you follow a plant-based nutrition program to reduce your total cholesterol level to below 150 milligrams per deciliter and the LDL level to less than 80, you cannot deposit fat and cholesterol into your coronary arteries, period. Okay, so she believed that, according to Dr. Esselstyn, as long as her total cholesterol was under 150, and as long as her LDL was under 80, she couldn't have a heart attack. Well, her LDL score was in that range. And let's see if I could find that. Where does it say her actual? Oh, here we go. So her total cholesterol at the time of her heart attack was 134. And let's see, where does this? Damn it. Okay, you guys can read this blog for yourself. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I've made a video where I actually showed her blog post where it said that. And so her LDL was under 70. That's the point. Her total cholesterol was under 150, but her triglycerides were about 190, and her HDL was about 20. Okay, and so she posts about this, so you guys can find that for yourself. That's just one case report. The second thing is this graph that Vegan Gains posts. This is a big thing. So the sample size is 2. Okay, he says, according to this graph, okay, see the red area right there, there's no plaque in the artery, no arterial sclerosis. And then the gray, the blue, and the orange are different types of plaquing in the arteries, okay? And so if you see right here, people, this is LDL score 50 to 60. Let's see if I have a better picture of this. Let's see. Here is the actual whole study. The whole study is called Normal LDL Cholesterol Levels Are Associated with Subclinical Arterial Sclerosis in the Absence of Risk Factors, okay? So this is a study that Vegan Gains usually uses to say that LDL cholesterol is the only risk factor for heart disease, which is false. N equals 2. So these are people's LDL scores, 50 to 60. N equals 2. That means there's only 2 people in this group with 50 to 60 nanograms per deciliter of cholesterol. And the red, they have no plaque in their arteries. But then the sample size triples. Now the sample size goes from 2 to 9 in the group with 60 to 70 nanograms per deciliter, where they only have a little bit of plaquing in the artery, okay? But the majority have none. Then the sample size quadruples. So now there's 4 times the people in the next highest cholesterol group compared to the lower one. So now 70 to 80 nanograms per deciliter, more cholesterol, okay? And there's 4 times the people in this group. And what do you know? There's a little bit more plaque in their arteries because there's more people. Now, the sample size doubles, and we have 80 to 90 people, or 80 to 90 nanograms per deciliter. So there's about 10 nanograms more LDL, and the sample size doubles. So what you're seeing here is as the sample size increases, the more people in the groups, the more heart disease they have. But coincidentally, the more people in the groups, the less heart disease they also have. So this is something that people will completely miss if they don't actually understand the study. And I hate this. No one reads science. Everyone's like, oh, the science says the LDL causes heart disease. They don't read the study, because if they did, they'd realize how much, how full of crap these people are. Sample size is 2, okay, in the lowest cholesterol group. Sample size is 9 in the second lowest cholesterol group. Sample size goes all the way up to 41 in the next cholesterol group, and then 94 people. So when you have more people in a sample size, you're going to have more variation in health outcomes. So what this graph is showing is the more people you have in a sample size, the more or the more people you have in a population, the more variance you're going to have in cholesterol. Now, the big thing to take away from this study that Vegan Gains is saying shows virtually zero heart plaquing in the artery when you have low cholesterol. This shows, look, let's see, the sample group with the very most people, 120 to 130 nanograms per deciliter of LDL. Sample size is about 300. And about half of these people have zero plaque in their arteries. Wow, 150 people with 120 to 130 nanograms per deciliter of LDL have zero plaque in their arteries. And then right here, the lowest cholesterol group, there's only 2 people with zero plaquing in their arteries. There's more people with high LDL that have zero plaque in their arteries than there are with the lowest cholesterol. Now let's look at the highest LDL cholesterol group. N equals 163 people. So there's 163 people with 150 to 160 LDL, and about 35 to 40% of them have zero plaque in their artery. Okay, so this pretty much shows that it doesn't matter what your LDL score is, because half the people don't have plaque in their arteries, and about half, or a little bit more than half, do. This is stupid. That's because of the sample size is what fucks it. So this is a very misleading conclusion from this data, and it's ridiculous. The next thing you want to know about this study is in the conclusion here and the results. So arterial cirrhosis presence and extent was also associated in the cardiovascular risk factor free group with hemoglobin A1C. So glycosylated hemoglobin levels, that's hemoglobin A1C. That is the main measure of insulin resistance. So the more insulin resistant someone is, regardless of other risk factors, even if they don't smoke or anything, the more insulin resistant someone is, the more heart disease they're going to have. Isn't that weird that a paper that says, that's talking about LDL being associated with arteriosclerosis in the absence of risk factors, also points out that the extent and presence of arteriosclerosis, of plaque in the arteries, is associated with insulin resistance. That's what this says. And I asked Vegan Gains about this in the comments multiple times, and he ignores this. So yeah, I don't know if he's just like doesn't care, if he doesn't care, if he ignores it, if he's just delusional, or if he's just lying and ignoring this. But many experts, including myself, and I wouldn't call myself an expert necessarily, but many experts, at least half the scientific community, including the American Heart Association, agree that insulin resistance is actually one of the primary risk factors for heart disease. And again, half the scientific community believe that it's the primary risk factor for heart disease, okay? Directly driving inflammation, which is the beginning of plaquing of the artery. Before any plaques even develop, it's damage to the arteries. Many things like advanced glycation end products and things are related to sugar and glucose in the body binding to proteins and things, which can create inflammation and free radical damage in the body. There's many, many links of insulin resistance and inefficient metabolism of glucose, okay, in the body, linking to inflammation and many of these diseases. Now, let's see. So another thing is, this is the American Heart Association. This is Vegan Gains' best friend. He's always like, oh, the American Heart Association, blah, blah, blah. Cardiovascular disease and diabetes, okay? Go ahead and check this out. Read it for yourself. Why are people with diabetes at increased risk for cardiovascular disease? Well, for one, people with diabetes have greater incidences of high blood pressure. And I've actually posted many studies showing that low carbohydrate diets can cause a triple improvement in blood pressure and the hemoglobin A1C compared to even the Dean Ornish diet. And then the other thing is the American Heart Association even acknowledges people with diabetes typically have high LDL, but also low HDL and high triglycerides. And they go on to say this triad of poor lipid counts often occurs in patients with premature coronary artery disease. It is also characteristic of lipid disorder, blah, blah, blah. And so they admit that this is a huge incident. They don't just say, oh, because they have high LDL. No, they have low HDL and high triglycerides, which Vegan Gains posts his blood work in this video, and he actually has great blood work, just so you guys know. Vegans aren't necessarily going to have heart disease. Okay, I'm just saying that it's not LDL. And so the American Heart Association agrees that essentially, so you can look up this is a good article that explains this itself. Framingham Heart Study is a follow-up. It shows that LDL cholesterol, that HDL cholesterol essentially is more important than LDL. And so I'll try to see if I could zoom in for you guys on this one. All right, so essentially, okay, low HDL. So your HDL level, if you just have low HDL, which is about below 60, you're already at a greater increase in heart disease, okay? You have approximately a 30% higher risk of heart disease just having low HDL, like that vegan in that article I showed has. With elevated triglycerides and optimal LDL, like that woman had, you have a 30% higher risk. Okay, so with optimal triglycerides and elevated LDL, 30% higher risk. Elevated triglycerides and optimal LDL, 30% higher risk. But if you have both elevated triglycerides and elevated LDL with low HDL, you have a 60% higher risk of having a heart attack, essentially. And this is the actual incidence of heart disease. This is not some dumb correlation study. This is actual incidences. And that vegan that I showed you guys in that article, same thing. She was a great example of this. Now, optimal triglycerides and optimal LDL, with high HDL, you have the lowest risk of heart disease. But if you have elevated triglycerides and optimal LDL, 30% lower risk just by having high HDL. High HDL is the primary metric that you want to focus on. And then triglycerides and LDL are secondary, but I'd say triglycerides and HDL are the most important. Coincidentally, as stated in this American Heart Association article, high LDL, low HDL, and high triglycerides are directly correlated with diabetes. And so what I believe is going on here is I believe the primary cause of arteriosclerosis, plaque in the artery, well, generally there's a couple other, there's many other potential causes like viruses and, just excessive stress and probably nutrient deficiencies and things. I think the main thing is insulin resistance in general. And studies show up to 80% of people in America are insulin resistant and they're undiagnosed. They don't even know it. So the next thing I want to show you guys is, okay, so I've asked Vegan Gains about this, and I pointed out the flaws many times. And I talked about the Seventh-day Adventist studies, and I pointed out the flaws in these things. And his resort, and this is what Lane Norton does too, when you call him out on his nonsense and you present good counter arguments, then they resort to meta-analysis and comprehensive reviews of thousands of different studies. This is ridiculous because when you have thousands of different studies combined into one, what happens is you can't control for confounding variables, okay? You can use all the complex mathematics and analytics that you want, statistics and things, but when it comes down to it, randomized controlled trials are the golden standard, and many of them show increased, improved lipid panels and things on low-carb diets compared to high-carb diets, regardless of calories and protein intake. And vegan diets do well too. But you can actually look at what people are eating and put the diet to the test with those things. The problem with these gigantic studies, first of all, is that you have to actually look at the individual studies included, and these usually include hundreds of different studies, many of which don't even support the conclusion of the meta-analysis. And you have to actually ask yourself, well, how did they get this? Because there's usually flawed data. Like, for example, imagine if that study that Vegan Gains referenced, imagine this one. Oh, it's LDL cholesterol. That's what this graph shows. Like stuff like this that you can't actually look at the raw data and see the flaws in it are included in these large meta-analysis. Imagine hundreds of different studies with flawed conclusions based on, improper data and methods that failed to mention this in the conclusion, that insulin resistance is also associated with heart disease, and they just blame it all on LDL cholesterol, or associative studies where they take people that are eating Big Macs and French fries and they call them red meat eaters, and they say, oh, red meat is associated with heart disease because people who eat Big Macs eat the most red meat in these studies typically. And it's not the sugar in the sodas, it's not the French fries, it's the red meat that they're eating in these meals. And these are the damn studies, and then observational trials with food surveys that aren't reliable, that are included in this meta-analysis. And you have to consider, well, what type of studies are these and things like that. The next thing that you have to understand, and I should have put this first, is their conflict of interest. Okay, so let's see if I can get to that. So these people that made this study here, so this is a gigantic meta-analysis. Vegan Gains like, oh, well, what about this meta-analysis? Comprehensive review of the literature, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, this is actually the review that exposes that one. Sorry, this is the one I wanted to show. Low-density lipoproteins cause arteriosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. This is the one that Vegan Gains always says, oh, this is the proof, okay? You can't get any better than this. Yeah, can't get any better than this? Well, let's look at their conflict of interest. How about that? Funding, conflict of interest. Receive research grants from Pfizer, okay? I mean, all of these are gigantic pharmaceutical companies. All of them are tied to stand drug companies. There's a gigantic paper using manipulative mathematics that people don't understand. They don't care. Trying to say that high LDL plays a causal role in heart disease. Imagine this, like physicians, they see this like, oh shit, if you have high LDL, you're going to have a heart attack. I better put you on a statin drug. So these people are all sponsored by statin drug companies. Why would people that are endorsed by statin drug companies want to make a paper that claims high LDL is a causal risk factor? Because statin drug companies profit off of this. So Pfizer, let's see here. Pfizer, they created, their products include Lipitor, used to lower LDL cholesterol, multiple other ones like Viagra. Okay, so they want to put you on Lipitor, they want to put you on Viagra. You hear all these plant-based people saying, oh, high saturated fat impairs endothelial function, which also causes erectile dysfunction. What does that sound like? Doesn't that sound like an advertisement for, high LDL causes erectile dysfunction. So they want to put you on Lipitor, they want to put you on Viagra. These plant-based doctors, they're pretty much, driving doctors prescribing these pharmaceutical drugs. So Pfizer, Lipitor. What about Merck? Okay, most of these people have ties to Pfizer and Merck. Just to name a couple. Merck actually created one of the very first statin drug companies. Let's see if we can find that. Let's see. Yeah, well, they did. So you can, here you go, first statin. Merck scientists developed lovastatin, the first drug of the statin class. Okay, and that's not even including the, multiple other pharmaceutical companies that made this study. So look, I doubt any vegans have actually watched this critique video, but yeah, the evidence of LDL causing heart disease is extremely weak, and it's generally promoted by these statin drug company pushing, organizations, pharmaceutical drugs. They want to put you on Lipitor, want to put you on Viagra, and they say the cause of erectile dysfunction is LDL, saturated fat, heart disease. So they want to put you on these drugs. If you have high LDL, I'm going to put you on Lipitor. And I should have prepared this, but I believe Lipitor can actually cause erectile dysfunction. Okay, and they'll be like, oh, it's your LDL. You have heart, you're in the beginning stage of heart disease. We got to put you on Viagra to help you out with that. Statin drug to prevent heart disease. Little do people know, statin drugs can actually cause coenzyme Q10 deficiency, which can actually increase your risk of heart disease. If you get put on diuretics, mineral deficiencies, which can cause heart palpitations, which can cause heart failure and cardiac arrhythmias, which can cause sudden changes in the heart, which can cause sudden death. The list goes on, but it's going to be a tree of symptoms remedied with medications, which cause more symptoms, which need more medications, and it's all caused by improper information. If people just understood, as long as you eat whole foods, like following a Mediterranean diet, as long as you don't have food intolerances to those grains and things and all the fiber that they eat, and you don't limit saturated fat, you eat plenty of fish, and plenty of olive oil. Don't worry too much about cheese, especially because you need the K2. Well, you don't need, it's K2 probably won't hurt you. The calcium is important. But, a Mediterranean diet, even without the saturated fat, is going to increase all of these factors we discussed in this video. You're going to prevent most of these diseases. So low glycemic load carbs, or just a low carb diet in general with healthy fats, lots of olive oil, lots of omega-3 fats. Don't worry too much about saturated fat. Avoid sugar, avoid high glycemic load carbs. And if you're overweight or insulin resistant, go on a low carb diet in general. Pay attention to this review right here and research HDL cholesterol, research triglycerides, research this data, and research insulin resistance and its role in heart disease. A good channel to follow is Dr. Ford Buer, MD, on YouTube. He constantly reviews a lot of new data that comes out, and he reverses plaquing in many of his patients using different diets. One of the main reasons why vegan diets can actually help reverse heart disease is because they also include lifestyle interventions like exercise. And I believe that, by nature, you're going to reduce calories because they're eating, just whole grains, reducing the fat, like the Ornish diet and things like that. When you calorically restrict, you will reverse insulin resistance and, probably cause regression of plaquing just by lowered inflammation from the low glycemic load carbs and less calories. Fasting can do the same thing. And there's many people who have used low carb diets and showed regression of plaque, confirmed with calcium, coronary artery calcium scans and other tests. Anyway, leave your question in the comments down below, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.